Today on Locked On Blue Jays, we continue our deep dive of what we've seen so far at the midway point of the season. Today, getting into the pitching. That's in the first two segments. And in the third and final segment, we'll get the stage set for this three-game series as the red-hot San Francisco Giants come to town for a three-gamer against the Toronto Blue Jays at the Rogers Center. And also in that third and final segment, of course, today is Trivia Tuesday.
You are Locked On Blue Jays, your daily Toronto Blue Jays podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, friends. Craig Ballard, Locked On Blue Jays. Yes, indeed. First year host of the Locked On Blue Jay podcast, but in my own personal life, been locked on the Toronto Blue Jays ever since I can remember. Certainly thank you and appreciate you for spending part of your day talking Toronto Blue Jay baseball with me. Of course, Locked On Blue Jay podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to remind you that you can catch all the Toronto Blue Jay games this season on SiriusXM. If you're taking this in on YouTube, hello to you. Please hit that like, drop that comment, and hit that subscribe. If you're one of the everydayers making the Locked On Blue Jay podcast your first podcast listen, I want to thank you for that as well. Hit that 5-star review and help spread the word as well to your family and friends about the Locked On Blue Jay podcast. San Francisco Giants in town for the first time since 2019. We're going to get set for that series in the third and final segment. For now, in the first and in the second segment, let's continue what we started yesterday, which is deep diving what we've seen at the midway point so far for your Toronto Blue Jays. Let's start by deep diving the first half from what we've seen from tonight's starter, Kevin Gausman. So yes, Gausman, remember the midway point is officially tomorrow. So Gausman will get one more start to add to his official midway point of the season, production. But do we even need to see another start from Kevin Gausman to know how we're going to go ahead and look at and evaluate the first half that he's had in 2023? Has he been good? My goodness. 7-3 record, 3.10 ERA for Kevin Gausman. Blue Jays 10-6 in Kevin Gausman starts. That includes winning his last 6 starts. Again, heading into tonight, hopefully 7 coming tonight. Tonight will be the 8th home start for Gausman at Rogers Center. In the previous 7, the Blue Jays have won 5 of those games. Gausman himself, 16 starts on the season. Tonight's his 17th. We know this guy, workhorse, right? Absolute workhorse. In those 16 starts, 3 stinkers, right? Open, honest conversation, 3 stinkers. At Houston, he was rocked. At Boston, he was rocked. And at home against Minnesota, remember last year against Minnesota at Rogers Center, didn't do well there either. One of those scenarios where sometimes a pitcher has the number of a franchise, sometimes the franchise has the number of a pitcher, right? Minnesota, for whatever reason, hits Gausman very well. So did have those 3 starts there. Now, outside of those 3 starts, and by the way, you can really see a Gausman stinker coming right out the gate, can't you? That's something that this first half taught us. Right away on those 3 stinkers, you could see that Gausman's control wasn't nearly as good as sharp as what it usually is, and you could see the velocity was down. So it's very measurable. It's very, very obvious early. For whatever reason, Gausman's tired. I don't know, but you can see in those games that it's going to be a scuffle. Now, of course, thank goodness as a Toronto Blue Jay fan, it's very few and far between. We're talking about 3 starts here out of 16. How about those other 13 starts? Can we give some love to those other 13 starts? Because they've been eye pop emoji. Blue Jays 9-4 in those other 13 starts for Gausman. Gausman's ERA in those other 13 starts is 1.36. That's Cy Young. That's Cy Young on the mound for the Toronto Blue Jays in the first half of this season. 13 of those 16 starts, stellar. 86 innings pitched in those 13 starts. So that's an average of 6 2/3 innings. Again, workhorse, right? In those 86 innings, 114 strikeouts. Eye pop emoji. Holy moly. Only 18 walks in there. So that's a strikeout to walk ratio of 6.33 strikeouts for every walk. This is a video game out here. Kevin Gausman in the first half so far, I say again, so far, he's starting tonight, 75 strikeouts from the splitter alone. Everydayers will know we've deep dived Kevin Gausman's splitter a few times here. It is a top tier pitch in all of baseball. How many pitchers this season won't get 75 strikeouts for the entire season, right? Kevin Gausman's sitting at 75 and counting just on the splitter alone. One home run this splitter's been touched for. He throws it more than any other pitch, and we know how good it is. One home run. It's been thrown how many times? How many, batters had a chance for that? 75 strikeouts versus 1 home run. This pitch, my goodness. Gausman's whiff rate on the splitter in the first half of the season was 43%. I think last season, I think it was 44%, like just so consistent and so dominant with this pitch. And the first half of 2023 was no exception for Kevin Gausman. How about Jose Barrios? Because there was exceptions for Jose Barrios, right? The 2023 Jose Barrios significantly better than what we saw in 2022, was certainly the first half anyway. Overall, Barrios sitting at 8-5. His ERA is at 3.60. Now, again, Gausman will pitch tonight to close out the first half, and Gausman has 7 wins. So Gausman could get, and we hope does get, his 8th win tonight. If he does, that will tie him with Jose Barrios. Barrios has 8 wins at the midway point. That leads the Toronto Blue Jays. Blue Jays 10-6 when Barrios has been on the mound. And not only has he been hot lately, but the Blue Jays have been hot lately when he's been pitching, because they've won 8 of Barrios' last 10 starts. Last season, and everydayers will know, we looked a lot at this as well. Blue Jays were 14-2 at Rogers Center last season when Jose Barrios started. I mean, just winning games left and right. 14-2 at Rogers Center. 5-1 in the first half this season at the Rogers Center. And I know we're looking at first halves of the seasons here. I just want to digress real quick here, because I think this deserves a shout out. Since the Jose Barrios became a Toronto Blue Jay, he started as a Toronto Blue Jay for the Jays at the Rogers Center 29 times. The Blue Jays are 23-6 in those games. I mean, if you're like me and winning is the name of the game, because Barrios had the highest ERA in baseball last season, right? Aesthetically, it wasn't pleasing. But the Blue Jays were 23-9 when he pitched last season, 14-2 at home, 23-6 overall when he's been at home. And that's incredible. In those 6 losses, by the way, the Blue Jays have totaled 7 runs. Pardon? So in those 29 home starts for the Toronto Blue Jays for Jose Barrios, and he's been on the, and Barrios has been on the mound at the Rogers Center. If the Blue Jays offense did anything, the Blue Jays are winning that game. The Blue Jays have won with Barrios on the mound at home. I know we're looking at the first half, but I just think that is just so impressive. Now, speaking of so impressive, well, it didn't start this way, right? You remember the first couple starts that Barrios had this season, he was rocked at Kansas City. He was rocked at LA. In those first 2 starts, he had already given up 12 earned runs. He'd only pitched about 6 or 7 innings in total, because he got rocked both times. And his ERA was over 11 in those first 2 starts. And he's had 14 starts since then. Blue Jays are 10-4 over those 14 starts. Barrios himself is 8-3 over those 14 starts since those first 2 where he was rocked this season. Jose Barrios, worst ERA in baseball last season, 2.74 ERA. That gets a holy moly. I mean, worst ERA in baseball last season. This season currently sits at number 30 in baseball, number 16 in the American League currently, Jose Barrios. The top 5 pitchers last season for ERA, Jose Barrios currently has a better ERA than any of those guys. And there's other big names as well. I mean, Barrios right now has had a better ERA than Shane Bieber, Spencer Strider, Zach Wheeler, Corbin Burns. Jose Barrios, first half of this season, my goodness. And that's the actual, stats. The eye test, what have we seen? Was significantly better command of that fastball. In general, we've seen Jose Barrios in the first half be on the corners way more often than missing in the middle of the plate, right? The location has been quite the big deal. And what have we seen in the first half that I've loved and that I think is sustainable and really the cause for optimism for Jose Barrios going forward? He's been living at the bottom of the strike zone. Has he been missing his pitches elevated in the middle of the plate at all, or even on the corners elevated? It's been at the bottom of the strike zone. Jose Barrios in the first half of 2023 was a ground ball machine, and I loved it. How about the Hound on the mound? How about Chris Bassitt? And if you're wondering about Alek Manoah, remember, of course, we looked at Alek Manoah already yesterday when we started our deep dive of the Blue Jays at the midway point. So let's get into Chris Bassitt. Bassitt 7-5 overall, ERA 4.32, and that ERA has really ballooned lately. Bassitt has struggled lately, for having an open, honest conversation. He limped to the finish line of the first half of the season. Guys like Kikuchi we'll look at in a second, guys like Barrios, Gausman. There's a few Blue Jay pitchers who thankfully charged to the finish line to the first half of the season. Chris Bassitt, no, that was not the case. Blue Jays in the first half just 8-8 when Bassitt on the mound, and that includes losing 5 of his last 7 starts. As I say, he is scuffling. We looked earlier at how, Kevin Gausman is feast or famine, a little bit of famine, so much feast, right? A little bit of famine. Bassitt is feast and famine as well, but it's way more evened out. We'd like to see it a little bit more in the feast favor. I mean, you look at the feast, Chris Bassitt, has had 7 starts this season, 7, where he's gone into at least into the 7th inning. I thought every single one of those starts were absolute gems. He had that complete game gem. Like we've seen some feast starts from Chris Bassitt, but man, have we seen some famine starts from Chris Bassitt? He allowed 7 runs to Minnesota. He allowed 8 runs to Baltimore. He allowed 9 runs to St. Louis. In 6 of his 16 starts, the Hound has gone 5 innings or less for the Toronto Blue Jays. So, and we were talking earlier with Gausman, you can see it coming right away when you can see it's just not going to be his day. With Bassitt, it's more been a little bit more prolonged, and then all of a sudden you see him getting taken out in the 3rd or the 4th inning, and the other team's got a definite crooked number on the board, and that's happened significantly too many times in the first half this season. I like Chris Bassitt. I'm excited about Chris Bassitt being a Blue Jay. I think he's the definition of a professional pitcher. But we always just have open, honest conversations here on Locked On Blue Jays, right? And overall, 7-5 record. Overall, Blue Jays 8-8 in the first half for Chris Bassitt. No, it definitely needs to be better than that. Now, there are a few things we can point at to get better. The concrete things that could help this scenario get better in the second half. The first is, let's look at with Danny Jansen, for example. So the Hound has thrown on the mound to Danny Jansen 5 times in the first half. His ERA with Danny Jansen as the catcher, over 10. I will say that again. 5 starts with Danny Jansen, 5 times pitching to Danny Jansen in the first half for Chris Bassitt, and his ERA is over 10. How about the flip side of the coin? And unfortunately, because we don't know when Alejandro will be back, right? Alejandro Kirk finishes the first half of the season on the injured list, but Alejandro Kirk has caught Bassitt 11 times in the first half, and Bassitt's ERA with Kirk behind the mound in those 11 starts, big sample size, 1.75. About an 8.5 run differential in an ERA, whether it's Danny Jansen back there or Alejandro Kirk back there. Why? I don't know. But the first half of the season, those splits are monumentally different. So definitely need Alejandro Kirk back. Heck, Kirk and Bassitt even did a good job together with the running game. They're even working in unison to help curb the running game. With Kirk and Bassitt together, opponents have tried to steal 7 times, and they've been thrown out 3 of those 7 times. They're successful 4 times and thrown out 3 times. So Kirk and Bassitt, for whatever reason, working really well together. Need him back. Now, a few things that definitely want to see continue from Bassitt in the second half. The opponents are hitting just .230 versus Bassitt. That's certainly worth mentioning. That is the best on the Toronto Blue Jays. Now, the night starts as well. Chris Bassitt, veteran pitcher, right? Whatever the legit routine is to get yourself ready for a night start, Chris Bassitt has mastered it. He's had a dozen night starts as a Toronto Blue Jay in the first half, 7-3 record. All 7 of his wins were in night starts, 2.55 ERA. We also want to see Chris Bassitt continue to do what he's been doing at home at the Rogers Center. I really wondered about this because Chris Bassitt is traditionally a fly ball pitcher. Then he gets signed and the Blue Jays announced they're moving in the fences. So I wondered what he thought of that. But man, if he did have any concern about it, it hasn't been on display. He's had 7 starts at the Rogers Center, and his whip at home, his walks and hits per innings pitched, 0.820. That's an eye pop emoji, man. That is video game numbers. That is incredible. His worst home start was his last time out against the A's. Again, right? He's limped to the finish line of this first half, but every other start he had at home, absolutely want that to continue. The last thing we'll mention on Chris Bassitt that definitely cannot continue is we mentioned opponents hitting just .230. That's great. That's the best, just .230. That's the best on the Blue Jays. But when you look at the breakdown, really tells a story of really backs up what the eye test tells us from the first half of the season as well. The righties hitting just 183 against Chris Bassitt. Chris Bassitt is dominating right-handed batters. Lefties, 280 against the Hound on the mound. 280. Lefties have had 20 fewer at-bats so far this season against Bassitt, but of the 16 home runs he's allowed, 13 to the lefties. The lefties are hitting, and they're hitting for power against Chris Bassitt. Now, we've seen in the first half that he threw his cutter a lot to lefties, so going, in the second half, either a tweak to that pitch or at the very least a tweak to the strategy, your pitch selection to lefties. You've noticed in the last, as we closed the first half of the season, what did we see opponents doing against Chris Bassitt? It was anybody in the organization that was a lefty. Here's your plane ticket, grab your bat. You're playing Chris Bassitt tomorrow at the Rogers Center at 7:07. And their teams are stacking the lineup with lefties because the Hound on the mound the last few weeks as we closed the first half of the season, boy, he's really struggled against those lefties. Coming right up on Locked On Blue Jays, and we continue our first half deep dive of the pitching staff, and we're about to get into a very pleasant first half surprise. You say Kikuchi, plus we'll look at the bullpen. Reminder that you can catch tonight's Jays Giants game on Sirius XM. I wanted to mention that for a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. Well, it's the same when it comes to your car, right? To your vehicle. All the parts need to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and or accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits just right the first time around. You just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know that the part will fit or your money back. Because like in sports, confidence is the name of the game. And when you shop at eBay Motors, over 122 million parts to choose from, you're going to be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. Guaranteed fit only available for U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Speaking of those lefties, how about the left-handed pitcher in this Blue Jay rotation? How about Yusei Kikuchi? My goodness. Should I stand up? I'll be out of the frame. It's probably not good for the YouTube. But, I mean, is this a standing ovation for what we've seen from the first half of the season from Yusei Kikuchi? It's not even just enough to say that he's been really good, for a fifth starter, right? For me personally, every day is no. For my money, that would already be good enough. It's not even enough to say that. He's been really good, period. He closes the first half of the season at 7-2. That ties his career high for wins. He was 7-9 in 2021. Sorry, so 7-9, but he's 7-2 right now. He's gotten his ERA in the threes. Blue Jays 11-5 when Yusei Kikuchi's taken the mound this season. And every dayers will know we've deep dived the schedule intricacies a lot. The first half of the schedule, such a bear and so road heavy. So Kikuchi's had, a lot of those roads. He's had 9 road starts already this season. Blue Jays are 6-3 on the road with Yusei Kikuchi on the mound. That's outstanding. Yes, he leads the league with 20 home runs allowed, but I started losing track. So it's either 13 or 14. I'm not sure the exact number, but I'm sure it's either 13 or 14 of those league-leading 20 home runs have been solo home runs. Doesn't mean it's good or anything like that, or it's still a home run, right? But, man, you talk about limiting damage. That's been the difference with Yusei Kikuchi in the first half of this season. This first half in 2023 for Kikuchi had to be the best half of baseball he's ever pitched at the professional level, allowing significantly fewer base runners than ever before in his career. And Kikuchi's always struggled with wildness, right? So we know the walks, but he's always hit a lot of batters as well. In the first half of this season, he hit just one batter. In the first half of this season, he's got the lowest whip of his career. In the first half of the season, he's got the best strikeout to walk ratio in his career. And in the first half, Yusei Kikuchi finished the first half with 5 straight starts, lowering that ERA. He's got it under 4 now, into the 3s. That's on the strength of finishing strong. Yusei Kikuchi, my goodness, just continue what you've been doing. If that ERA right now is hovering at 3.97, so it's hovering around 4, totally fine. If we can see even 70 to 80% in the second half of what we saw from Yusei in this first half, okay, that's not your typical number 5 starter, so I will be very pleased with that. How about the bullpen? Jordan Romano leads baseball, was tied for the lead in MLB with 23 saves. How about Eric Swanson? His 19 holds leads all of baseball. So from a fan base where a lot of people are pretty concerned about the back end of the bullpen, in the first half of the season, nobody had a closer with more saves than the Toronto Blue Jays in the first half of the season. Nobody had a setup man with more holds than Eric Swanson. And in the first half, did anybody have a lefty relief pitcher as good as Tim Meza? Can we shout out Tim Meza in the first half that we just saw this guy have? Take your mind's eye back. You remember opening day, Meza came in. Remember that insanely entertaining, and thank goodness the Jays won that 10-9 thriller on opening day and at St. Louis. Well, you may remember Tim Meza. He came into that game. He faced 3 batters. They all got a hit. There was a run scored in there as well. Now, since then, that was opening day. Since then, he's had 36 appearances, totaling 27 innings, 3 runs allowed. So since opening day, Tim Meza, over 36 appearances, has an ERA of 1.00. I'm going to ask, is that good? Holy moly, Tim Meza has been outstanding for the Toronto Blue Jays. Trevor Richards in the first half, trying to become at least the poor man's version anyway, right, of the 2022 Ross Stripling. He's trying to be that combo, opener, reliever, long inning guy. In the first half of this season, we saw Trevor Richards have a dozen outings where he went more than an inning for the Toronto Blue Jays. So again, I mean, he's really come to the rescue to eat some innings a few times. 53 strikeouts in the first half of the season for Trevor Richards, 40 of them, 40 of the 53 from the changeup. I mean, Trevor Richards' changeup is as top tier as Kevin Gausman's splitter. It is incredible. In the first half this season, opponents hit 111 versus Trevor Richards' changeup. I'm loving it. And finally, last thing we'll look at in the bullpen, we looked at yesterday. One of the bad news stories for the rotation. I should say the bad news story for the pitching staff for the Blue Jays in general in the first half of the season is whatever the heck has happened to Alek Manoah. He's not even with the team anymore. Well, somebody who didn't start the season with the team that in the first half is now with the team, and I think we see a lot more from him coming in the second half. Nate Pearson. Want to shout out Nate Pearson. 20 appearances. Now, overall, I know Pearson's numbers aren't, spectacular, but I want to say this, and follow me on this now here. Nate Pearson, he's had 20 appearances. 4 times in those 20 appearances, he's pitched back-to-back games. And on the second game of that back-to-back games, all 4 times he's been absolutely rocked. So of those 20 appearances, there's been 16, so the vast majority, 16 appearances where that wasn't the case, where Pearson came in, had at least one game between appearances. So they've got Pearson stretched out, right? They've got him ready to pitch between 6 to 8 batters, but for whatever reason, he's not ready for that back-to-back games just yet. So look at those 16 appearances where there was at least one game between the appearances. 22 innings pitched, 24 strikeouts, 4 runs allowed. That's a 1.67 ERA. Blue Jay fans have been clamoring for that back of the bullpen arm that throws fire. That's a strikeout per inning pitched guy. Nate Pearson over a strikeout per innings pitched. And in those 16 appearances, again, where there was at least one game between those appearances, 1.67 ERA. I'm really excited about what Nate Pearson can be for the Toronto Blue Jays in the second half of this season. Now, in our third and final segment today, San Francisco Giants red hot. We'll look at that in a minute here. They're in town as the Blue Jays continue this 9-game homestand. Overall, the franchise records between these two franchises over the course of their time together, Blue Jays 10 wins, 13 losses. Yeah, they've only played 23 times. I bet in your mind's eye, right? You're having a hard time remembering a whole lot of action between the Giants and the Blue Jays. Well, we know balanced schedule now, right? So get used to seeing the San Francisco Giants come to town and the Blue Jays head to San Francisco once every single season going forward. Now, so far this season, only the Tampa Bay Rays are better versus winning teams. So my goodness, the Blue Jays are just, this is just a tough series. It was a few Sundays ago. It was June 10th, Sunday, June 10th. The Giants were shut out at home by Kyle Hendricks and the Chicago Cubs. Now, since then, they've rhymed off. They're on a 12-2 run. They've rhymed off 12 wins in the 14 games that have followed. And if you want an even bigger sample size, over the last 38 games, San Francisco has lost just 11 times. They're 27-11 the last 38 games. The Toronto Blue Jays over that same span, just 19-19. April 24th, 2019. That's the last time the Giants were in Toronto. That was a 4-0 Giant victory. That was a mini 2-game series that San Fran was in town for. San Fran won both the games. That April 24th, that second game, 4-0 as Drew Pomeranz shut out the Blue Jays. The San Fran beat Clay Buchholz that day. Remember, Clay Buchholz was a Blue Jay for a few starts there. Brandon Belt, of course, a longtime superstar, right? Not just a superstar for the San Francisco Giants, beloved by that fan base, picking up steam with the Blue Jay fan base, of course, as well. Well, Belt was 1 for 2 in that game with a pair of walks. Of course he did, right? Of course, Brandon Belt had a pair of walks in any game we're ever talking about with him, of course. Former Blue Jays Kevin Pillar and Joe Panik actually hit 8th and 9th in the lineup for the Giants in that game. They combined to go 1 for 7. The only two Toronto Blue Jays that remain from that game are Danny Jansen and Tim Meza. As I said, the Giants would sweep that little 2-game series back in 2019. In the first game of that series, Belt and Panik would hit home runs. For the Blue Jays, Billy McKinney, who's hot right now for the New York Yankees, would hit a home run. The Giants doing a lot of winning, right? Very accurate. I would say it's almost similar to the Marlins, is that it's an offense you don't have to be too concerned about, but they'll play the game right, and they'll play fundamentally sound offensively. Defensively, they're the worst team in baseball, so hopefully that's going to continue during this series. Offensively, their leading hitter is Tyler Wade at 285, so they don't even have anybody hitting 300. Thairo Estrada is their base stealing threat. He's stolen 17 bases this season, only been caught 3 times, but you're not going to see a lot of action on the base pass at the Rogers Center from the opponents in this 3-game series. Thairo Estrada leads them at 17 steals. The second most steals on the team has 3. I mean, in all of baseball, only Minnesota and Colorado have fewer stolen bases so far than the San Francisco Giants. Now, they are number 9, so they're a top 10 team. They're number 9 in home runs. To be honest, San Fran's about 8th or 9th ranked in almost all the offensive categories. So good, but not great. Now, they do have 30 saves. Believe it or not, they've got 7 different relievers that have earned a save so far this season. Really, really incredible there. Again, I'll say the worst defense in baseball. Lamonte Wade over at first base. He leads baseball in errors for first baseman. J.D. Davis over at third base, not doing much better himself. He already has 5 errors. Michael Conforto. Michael Conforto is a name that Blue Jay fans will recognize. A lot of Blue Jay fans wanted Conforto to be that left-handed outfielder to get brought in the offseason, not a Kiermaier, not a trade for Varsho. They wanted Conforto. He's really struggling lately. Overall, not doing great for San Fran. A 240 average, 12 home runs, 767 on OPS. So not great. I mean, not horrible, but not great. Lately, it's been horrible. He's really struggling lately. Hopefully that continues in this series. A former Blue Jay, Ross Stripling, was activated from the injured list a couple days ago. He actually may start in tonight's game, or we may see him at some point in Tuesday night's game as the Giants may go to a bullpen game. Ross Stripling may be included as part of that. Boy, if the San Francisco Giants got banged for the buck for Ross Stripling, and we don't want to talk ill because we love Ross Stripling, right? But open, honest conversation. San Fran brought in Stripling at 2 years, $25 million. He started 9 games for the Giants so far. They've only won 2 of those games. Stripling himself is sitting at 0-2 with an ERA so far over 7. So that sets the stage for the San Francisco Giants coming to town. Now, it is Trivia Tuesday, so let's get some trivia questions in here that have to do with the San Francisco Giants in town. The Red Sox are coming in town for the weekend, so there is one trivia question in here as well about the Red Sox. So we'll have the answer for these trivia questions on a show later on this week, probably on Wednesday's show. We're going to get Tim Leeper. Remember Tim Leeper, former Blue Jay first base coach? He's joining us this week, so we'll reveal the answers because we'll have some fun with Tim Leeper, getting him to answer these questions as well. So we'll reveal that either Wednesday or Thursday, very likely on tomorrow on Wednesday's show. But first trivia question. Which former MLB star was traded from the Toronto Blue Jays late in 1992 to the New York Mets for David Cohn? He would later on become a San Francisco Giant, and for years he provided protection in that lineup for several years for Barry Bonds. Question number 2. Which switch-hitting outfielder acquired at the trade deadline by the Blue Jays from Seattle in 1997 from Mike Timlin and Paul Spojarek? And he would play for the Blue Jays in his career. He would play for the Giants in his career. And he made the catch of the final out of the only no-hitter in franchise history. That was Dave Stieb's no-hitter in 1990. Who was that outfielder? Switch-hitting outfielder. What Toronto Blue Jay in 2006 was traded to the San Francisco Giants for Vinny Chalk and Jeremy Accardo? And the notable thing about this particular trade is it was facilitated. It became necessary because mere days earlier, he got in a fight with then Blue Jay manager John Gibbons. Do you remember that? Yeah, which Toronto Blue Jay was that? That player went right from the Blue Jays to San Francisco a few days later. What was the name of the ambidextrous pitcher who pitched for the Blue Jays and the Giants? Do you remember him? There was a pitcher, he could pitch with his left or his right hand. So if a lefty came up, he just switched the glove and he pitched with his left hand. Righty came up, the exact same thing. Do you remember him? What was his name? Now, he pitched for other teams besides the Blue Jays and the Giants, but the Blue Jays and Giants are in there. And then finally, mentioned that the Red Sox coming to town. Well, September 6th, 2020 was the longest 9-inning game in Toronto Blue Jay franchise history. It was just a 9-inning game, yet it took almost 4.5 hours. Which Blue Jay media personality hit his lone home run as a Blue Jay in that game? I believe he hit about 36 in his career. I think it was as finishing his career actually in 2020 with the Toronto Blue Jays, hit his lone home run as a Toronto Blue Jay in that marathon game, September 6th, 2020. That'll wrap up Tuesday's Locked On Blue Jay podcast. Be sure to join me tomorrow. Remember, we have Tim Leeper coming up this week. Also, on tomorrow's episode, going to take a look at, as we're deep diving the midway point of the Toronto Blue Jays season, every day as we'll remember, there was a specific player I called out that I thought had to be the X factor for the Blue Jays in 2023. We're going to deep dive how that's looking, and did other players emerge as potential X factors in the first half of 2023. That's all on Locked On Blue Jays tomorrow. For now, keep it locked on the Locked On Podcast Network and check out Sully hosting Locked On MLB. Enjoy the game tonight. Remember, you can take that in on Sirius XM. Go Jays, go, and we'll talk tomorrow.